Yes, they're starting now.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Safiyya, for having me, and thank you for everyone for coming and attending. Today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about breaking the chain, navigating the trauma. As we all know, we come into this life to embark in a journey. This journey is filled with ups and downs. No one has promised us in this life to have a free ride or a life free of struggles. It's not there. There's no paradise on earth for that matter. No matter how privileged we are, we're all prone to unpleasant events. Encountering unpleasant events is part of our lives. And these unpleasant events is what psychologists would term as trauma, because each one of us have their own unique experience of an event or sometimes even a series of events that might disturb us emotionally and might cause us some kind of mental wound. That mental wound can sometimes penetrate to our unconscious and remain with us for a long time, especially if that wound started at early childhood. So trauma at early childhood has the greatest effect. Nonetheless, the traumatic events can be of different types. They can be as a result of a violent event, a violent experience, such as an assault, abuse, war, sometimes even natural disaster, sometimes a near-death experience. A near-death experience could be resulting from a medical experience, could be like people subjected to diseases such as cancer or strokes. Sometimes it's a result of car accidents or the like. Sometimes trauma can come from a more subtle experiences. Nonetheless, they have severe impact on our minds and our well-beings. For example, heartbreak resulting from a loss of love or the loss of loved one, whether through separation or through the death of that loved one. So many ways of experiencing trauma. And inshallah, in the next session, we're going to go through some of these ways that are more subtle, or these ways that we can avoid in our lives and the lives of our loved ones. But today we need to navigate more about understanding the trauma itself, how it's affecting us, because it's important to understand the effect of trauma on our lives. In order to understand more the effect of trauma in our lives, we would need to understand how our brain's functioning. As we know, the brain is the center of all the operations that are happening in our body, whether it's physical or mental. In the brain, we have, like in a simple terms, we have the left side and the right side. The left side is more what people would refer to as the analytic and the linguistic side, while the right side is more of the emotional side, the social formation side. In the left side, if we're talking about communication, so the left side will be processing the verbal communication, while the right side will be processing more of the nonverbal communication. For a metaphor, imagine a song. If your life experience is like a song, well, the lyrics of the song would be the left side, and the sound of music of the song would be the right side. More specifically, well, when you talk, now I'm talking to you, you hear the words that are coming from my mouth and resonate in your ears. These words, these verbal communications, this comes processed in your left brain. And it comes from my left brain, and it's processed in your left brain. However, my facial cues, my gesture, the tone of my voice, whether I'm calm, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy, all these emotions that connected with this communication are registered in your right side of the brain. So the right side of the brain is also the first side to evolve, the first part to evolve or to develop in the fetus while still in the womb. That's why a mother and a baby have nonverbal communication. They connect with each other with nonverbal communication. And if the mother is so stressed or going through trauma or trying to deal with trauma, the baby will sense that. And it's a very sensitive stage in the baby because the brain is still developing. The right side of the brain where the emotions are still developing. So when the mother is going through high stress or trauma, her cortisol levels will be very, very high. And cortisol can actually penetrate the placenta and it goes to the brain and it would affect the formation of the right brain. Trauma in general always affects the right brain. Another thing to learn about trauma. So for that reason, I'm going to tell you one thing also, like be kind to pregnant women. That's one way of breaking the chain. Be kind to pregnant women. They already got enough on their platter. Don't stress them more than what they are. They already have enough. So when it comes to memory, well, when something happened, an event happened, the facts that related to the event are processed and stored in the left side of the brain, whilst the emotions that related to the event, the smell, the sound, the places, the touch, all these are stored in the right side of the brain. So when it comes to communication, we have the verbal side in the left side, while the nonverbal communication, whether it's facial cues or else, it goes to the left side. And when it comes to memory, the events themselves, the facts surrounding the event, what happened, who did what, who said what took place, is all stored in the left side of the brain. While the emotions that are regarding that, the sound, the tone, the touches, the smells, all of these are stored in the right side of the brain. Also, the left side of the brain is considered to have all the conscious processes, and the conscious mind is the left side of the brain, while the right side of the brain is looked at as the unconscious mind. So trauma, specifically in childhood, early childhood, it actually hits the right side of the brain. That means the processing of the memory of the trauma will be affected. That means the feelings of the trauma would be affected. That means the communication between the left side and the right side will be affected. Now, in normal situations, our left side and right side are communicating in harmony. So when a normal event is happening, you will register the facts about the events, what happened, who said what did what, when this happened, everything that has to do with the actions, with the event, with the experience itself is going to be dealt with the left side of the brain, while at the same time the right side is processing the smells, the sounds, the emotions, all these things, and they're put together. So you have a good way of processing this memory and storing this memory in a way that you can recall the memory with the emotions and with the events in balance. But at time of the trauma, that harmony is disturbed, and the ability to process what's going on is disturbed. And the communication between the right and left brain is no longer there. So that's why a lot of people cannot remember what really went on through the trauma. They cannot remember the details of the experience, but they remember very well the feelings of the experience. The problem with that, as you know, when we do an action, all our actions are connected with the dimension of time. That's why when we talk about something, about an action, we have verbs that have past tense, and we have verbs with present tense or future tense, etc. But when it comes to emotions, they're not connected to time. So when the memory is processed during the trauma, that time element is a bit missing. That means a person who's traumatized, whenever the trauma emotion is evoked, they cannot feel that the trauma had passed or it just happened in the past. They feel as if the trauma is happening right now. They have the same fear or perhaps enraged, rage if it's an upsetting, whatever kind of upsetting trauma. It could be a trauma that evokes rage or fear or sadness or pain. They feel as if the experience is happening right now, and they also project in the future, so they'll always be expecting something bad to happen in the future. I'll give you an example. When you go sometimes, I think all of us have experienced that sometimes you smell something or you hear a music or hear a song, and immediately you're overwhelmed with this warm feeling if that is connected to a nice memory, and you remember that with warm feelings. If a song that reminds you of a loved one, or a smell that reminds you of an experience, beautiful experience you had, that smell, that sound, or that music can trigger a memory, and you immediately remember that. Or sometimes it's a place that you go to and suddenly you're overwhelmed with nice memory or sad memory if it was sad. Now imagine that memory was not a pleasant memory. Imagine it was a terrifying memory. Say a little girl, a woman, or when she was a little girl, she was abused. And let's say that the abuser, just right before abusing her, wore a big smile in his face. Then a big smile for this girl, as she grows up, even as a grown woman, would always trigger the same emotions of the abuse. So if she sees someone that she doesn't know and has a big smile in his face, any normal person, somebody's meet you for the first time and they smile to you, you feel kindness, you feel warmth. But for somebody who had association, the smile with the abuse, whenever she sees somebody smiling at her, especially strangers, she would immediately trigger, that would immediately evoke the emotions of the trauma, of the abuse. So she'll be terrified. She'll be expecting something bad coming from that person. The trauma is not connected to time. So our feelings don't know or don't realize in our subconscious that the danger has passed or the upsetting experience is no longer there as part of the past, because the trauma was distorted when it was stored as a memory. The trauma distorts and disrupts the way the brain processes the memory and stores the memory. Another thing that trauma might also do, it disturbs the accuracy of the memory. Sometimes it's hard for people who've been traumatized by a big event to actually understand what really went on, or actually relate to you with accuracy the details of the trauma, the details of that experience. It's very hard for them to remember. They might remember the emotions, but not the actual experience. This is sometimes has to do with a defense mechanism. As we said, the trauma affects the right side of the brain. One of two things happening. Either the right side of the brain would be evoked so badly that it kind of hijacked their entire being. So you're only feeling the emotions. So it's kind of hyper arousal. You're so much in the emotions, you cannot even think rationally and think that the event had passed, that is not happening now, that's not going to happen in the future, this is something of the past. You're just overwhelmed with the feelings. Another way that trauma might affect the right brain. So that person, as psychologists would call them, living in their right brain. But another way that trauma might affect the right brain is by inhibiting the right brain. You feel that numbness. And psychologists would say that the person living in their left brain, they lose connections with their emotions. They're incapable of feeling the way a normal person would feel. So they're kind of an autopilot. They're living their lives, but they're not actually experiencing life happening to them. They don't experience it. Another thing about trauma, it also affects our understanding to social cues. As we said, that trauma affects the right brain, and the right brain is the side of your brain that is responsible of forming your social experiences. The nonverbal communication, the gesture, the facial expressions, all these cues that helps you understand people around you, help you interact with people around you, help you form your experiences that related to social interactions and relationships. Trauma affects the way that you form your relationships with others, because the trauma is the trauma has disturbed the brain, the process of the brain. It's hard to understand what people are telling you the way they meant it. Somebody who's been through trauma misunderstands people's facial expressions, misunderstands people's gesture, misunderstands people's tone of voice, misunderstands what people are telling them. They don't realize the communication as they are. They don't form healthy relationships with people due to that. So the way they form their relationships with other people around them, it will be affected because of this trauma. Other problem with trauma is that it affects our sense of security. As we said, the trauma makes a person understand the experience with the emotions, not with the facts. The experience, the past experience, the traumatic experience, they understand them with their emotions, not with their facts. That results on feeling that the traumatic event is still is going to happen sometimes in the future. That gives them so much insecurity. They don't feel safe with other people. They don't feel safe around others. So their social formation is disrupted. Their memory of the trauma is disrupted, and their sense of time that related to the trauma is disrupted. That way, the feeling of safety is disrupted. They feel insecurities while dealing with people, and that might send them to isolation sometimes, or withdrawal from social interactions. And they also have sense of loss of control because of all of that. That results in sense of loss of control. You don't know that something bad is going to happen to you next. You're always in that fear. You cannot understand that what happened had happened and it's over. You're still expecting it to re-happen again. And sometimes they don't even realize that. They just have these feelings, but they don't know how to translate these feelings and how to process these feelings or understand why they have these feelings. And that's the sad thing about it. Trauma also affects our concentration. You often hear people telling you that they cannot concentrate. They have this all the time. They're like, I want to read a book, but I can't read a book anymore. Every time I read a book, my minds wander everywhere. I try to do a task and I lose interest or I lose concentration in the task. Also, it affects our learning abilities. It also affects our ability to remember things, not just the traumatic events, but because it's kind like of cast a fog over your brain. You know that feeling if you're going out and there's fog all over the town and you can't see clearly because of the fog? Sometimes our memory, this is happening in our brain because of the trauma. Sometimes people would think, oh, I'm losing my mind, or perhaps I'm getting dementia, I'm getting Alzheimer. No, it's the trauma that casts that fog on your brain that makes it hard for you to remember things the way they were. It also sometimes takes what psychologists call it sense of vitality. That means it's hard for you to experience life. It also sometimes trauma, well, not sometimes, but most of the times trauma leads to some mental issues like depression. Depression is highly related to trauma. It also can lead to anxiety. It can lead to nightmares, flashbacks. It might also lead to self-harm or suicide in extreme cases. Some of mental illnesses that psychologists did not relate to trauma before, nowadays new research and new studies have started to link these to trauma. Like, for example, borderline personality disorder. Now many psychologists are saying this is highly trauma related, and it needs to be treated from that way. Another thing that is happening is also trauma might actually have physical effects on you. Migraines, headaches, muscle pain, spasm. But mostly trauma and depression and stress point in the brain are highly linked to our digestive system. That stomach ache that you have when you have no issues with your stomach, or your colon hurting from time to another. That diarrhea or constipation or consistent problems in your digestive system, that might be related, trauma related actually. So knowing this, why actually we need to learn about trauma? First of all, I hope by listening to me today that if any of you had experienced some of these things that I'm talking about today, and you were full of self-blame. Why do I react that way? Why do I respond that way? Because maybe somebody sent something and it triggered some emotions that you didn't understand why this emotion is happening to you. Or you were in a place or a situation or social event or something, and you reacted or responded in a way that is rationally, you're not supposed to react that way. And you keep self-blaming you while I'm doing this, while I'm always acting like that, while I'm responding to people like this. I know that person didn't mean anything when they said that. I know that this action didn't require all that extreme response or reaction. Why have I done that? I hope when you're hearing me today that you stop this self-blame and you have some compassion toward yourself and try to seek help, because this is happening to you and you're confused and you're upset about it. You stop that confusion. I hope that confusion is eliminated today. Or maybe this is not happening to you. Maybe it's happening to a loved one. Maybe you see someone around you that overreacting to things and you don't understand why they're overreacting to things. Hope this clears the confusion a little bit. So the awareness, the understanding is the first step towards the solution. Also, trauma is actually treatable, and we actually overcome trauma. There was a study that was conducted on a group of women. These women were sexually assaulted at some point of time in their lives. As we all women understand, the worst violation a woman can experience is sexual assault. And the researchers were surprised to find that some of the women in the group managed actually to overcome this trauma and live a normal life. They got married, they had children, they're functioning well in their lives, while others were stuck on the trauma. And they had actually what the researchers called complex trauma. They weren't able to have normal lives. They weren't able to function well. They weren't able to have their own families and be normal again. As researchers start interviewing the women, try to understand what differentiates these two groups, they found out that the group that managed to overcome the trauma and live a normal life, around the time of the trauma, they actually spoke about their trauma to people, to someone around them. And that person validated their pain. They empathized with them. They supported them. It's true that that person couldn't, for example, avenge from or punish the abuser, but they gave them support. They gave them empathy. They gave them validation. Whilst the other group either tried to talk about it, but the people that they talked to did not validate their pain, did not support them, or they couldn't just bring themselves up to talk about it. So the difference between overcoming trauma and not overcoming trauma is compassion, empathy, validation, support. And these things we need in order to break the chain of trauma. We need these things to incorporate these values in our lives towards ourselves, if we are the ones who had experienced the pain, or towards the ones who are around us, our loved ones, our friends, our community. Well, the good news is one of the greatest blessings from God upon humanity is what neurologists would call neuroplasticity. Remember, we were saying earlier that trauma affects the brain, and sometimes it will affect the brain during early childhood, during the very critical time when the brain is still in early stages, still forming. You see how the trauma disturbs the brain and causes all these problems and cuts the communication and makes blockage in the brain and inhibition here and overactivating there. Sometimes even affect the formation of some parts of our neurons on the brain itself. But that neuroplasticity means that our brains are flexible. And because they are flexible, they are fixable. So trauma can be treated and you can overcome it and you can function well despite everything bad that happened to you in the past. Actually, these things might even make you more resilient, stronger. Trauma gives us wisdom. We've spoken before about the bad effects or the negative effects of trauma. Trauma can give us growth and wisdom if we manage to overcome it correctly and we didn't lock ourselves in the trauma. You will never find growth or wisdom if you keep living in that trauma and you never get out of it. If you keep living in the circle of the bad feelings, if you keep locking yourself inside these negative feelings, negative emotions, but you will receive lots of wisdom and growth, and you will acquire that if you managed to overcome the trauma and pass it through it. And not only you will have wisdom and growth, but you will have also greater empathy to others, because a person who had experienced pain can more likely to empathize with people and understand their pain and relate to their pain. So alhamdulillah for neuroplasticity. Furthermore, one of my friends, a great friend of mine once told me that just like good deeds wipes off bad deeds, also good experiences, positive experiences can wipe off negative experiences. So just like it's inevitable to encounter unpleasant situations, it's also possible and it's feasible to encounter positive experiences. As we talk today about trauma and mental health, we hear so much talk about our ecosystem and how much we need to preserve the ecosystem, the earth, for not just ourselves, but also for the generations to come. That physical preservation of earth should also be accompanied by the preservation of our eco-mental well-being. Because trauma, severe trauma, not only affects the person that experiencing the trauma, but sometimes trauma can penetrate into our DNA, in the situations where the trauma is highly severe, like in wars and all the atrocities that we're seeing around us. It actually penetrates the DNA. It actually changes the genes. That's what you call epigenetics. That means the grandchildren of these children that we see every day in Palestine and Lebanon and other places on earth that are suffering badly, the grandchildren of these children are going to be born with genes that has trauma and depression and anxiety in them. So let's pray that compassion would prevail over hate, that humanity would prevail over politics, and that peace would prevail over war. Thank you.